The neighborhood was typical, neatly trimmed hedges, lawns mowed with military precision, and house colors varying within a palette approved by a small-minded committee. The morning sun danced over the tops of identical brick chimneys, casting long shadows across the asphalt. It was quiet here, almost too quiet, the kind that clung to your skin like a clingy sweater on a crisp autumn day. I liked it here, or at least I had learned to. There was a rhythm, a predictability that could almost lull you into a sense of false security. Until Karen. That is, she was the kind of neighbor who could spot a leaf out of place from 100 paces and had the inclination to point it out. Repeatedly. Her house was a mirror image of mine. Save for the garish pink flamingos that stood watch in her front garden, they were her sentinels, observing all who dared to pass, just like Karen herself. Her gaze, sharper than any hawk's, missed nothing. When I first moved in, she welcomed me with a fruit basket and a smile that barely reached her eyes. The basket was filled with apples polished to a gleam, each one a silent warning. She was polite, almost excessively so, in a way that felt as structured as the meetings she chaired at the homeowners association. I thanked her, though there was a chill to her warmth, like stepping from sunlight into a shadow. It began with a note, a small square of paper slipped under my door, a reminder. It said, "To keep my lawn mowed to the appropriate height, a rule from the HOA handbook." I smiled at the note, a thin smile that was more muscle memory than anything genuine. But I complied. My lawn never looked better. Then came the sideways glances, the whispered criticisms barely audible over the hum of the neighborhood. They were insistent, relentless, like the tapping of rain against a window on a stormy night. She was displeased. It seemed, with the way I had painted my shutters, a shade too bold for her sensibilities. Finally, it was the locks. The old ones were replaced, a simple act of security. It was my home now, after all. But to Karen, this was an affront, an act of rebellion against the neighborhood's aesthetic uniformity. Her frown deepened, a line etched into her face, as if carved by years of dissatisfaction. Perhaps she had expected a fight, a confrontation where she'd wield her power like a sword. But I did nothing. I let her fury burn, a fire that fed on its own fuel, while I watched, a silent observer to her unfolding drama. And then, a twist of fate, unexpected, ironic, a letter in the mail, crisp and official. I was no longer just a resident. I was her landlord. The irony was a bitter, sweet chocolate melting on the tongue, a revelation that shifted the balance of power in a way neither of us had anticipated. As I stood on my porch, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The neighborhood was the same, and yet everything had changed. I breathed in, the air cool and clear. Karen's house was dark, save for the flicker of a television through the window. The flamingos were still, their shadows long and reaching across the grass. In the quiet of the evening, a thought surfaced. Unbidden, life had a peculiar way of rearranging itself, and sometimes all one needed was the patience to watch it unfold. The morning light was barely filtering through the trees when the first signs of Karen's escalation began to reveal themselves. A thin, printed notice fluttered on my door, pinned neatly with a thumbtack as if it were a declaration. The edges curled slightly in the gentle breeze. It was an artifact of her intent, a testament to her growing obsession with control, masked as concern for the community. The paper was filled with new rules, absurd ones. Lawn gnomes must be precisely 2 feet tall. No more, no less. Garden hoses must be coiled clockwise at all times. Trash cans had to be brought in no later than 6 to 15 a.m. on collection days. An impossible feat for anyone with the audacity to sleep past dawn. Each guideline seemed crafted to target some perceived flaw in the neighborhood, some slight against the aesthetic purity Karen envisioned. They were boundaries drawn by a mind in turmoil, a mind determined to assert its dominance over the landscape through sheer willpower and officiousness. Beneath the surface of these paper rules something more insidious spread. Gossip, like rot in the roots of a tree, began to weave its way through the community, whispers at the mailbox, casual conversations growing thorns. Karen's voice carried over fences, her words tinged with the kind of practiced concern that barely masked her true intent. She spoke of disturbances in the harmony of our enclave, of people, though she never named names, who lacked respect for the rules, who brought chaos with them like a storm cloud ready to burst. The implication was clear, and it hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. What was the cost of peace? I pondered this while tending to my garden, feeling the earth cool and moist between my fingers. Was it the price of compliance with arbitrary mandates? Or was it the silent endurance of unwarranted scrutiny? Karen's barrage of citations began to arrive, each more petty than the last. A dead leaf overlooked on the lawn, a bird bath filled slightly above regulation capacity. Through it all, I remained a portrait of calm. Externally, a gentle nod, a soft smile. Internally, a quiet storm brewing. The absurdity of it all was almost laughable. Almost. Karen believed she was waging a war for order, a righteous battle against the creeping chaos she saw in every deviation from her vision. But in truth, she was fighting shadows, her own fears reflected back at her 100-fold. And then, of course, came the moment when her world tilted, ever so slightly, off its axis. She appeared at my door, a bundle of papers clutched tightly, her eyes alight with the fervor of someone who had convinced themselves of their own just cause. Her voice, when she spoke, was a knife edge of tension. But I said nothing. I simply handed her the letter folded neatly, my name printed in bold at the top. Her eyes scanned it, and I watched the realization seep into her like ink staining fabric. The knowledge that the house she had tried to dominate, the life she attempted to regulate, now belonged to me, her new landlord. Her confusion was a tempest, and I stood in its calm eye. The irony was almost poetic, and as I closed the door gently behind her, a small, amused smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. The cool autumn air wrapped around me as I sat on the porch, a perfect refuge from the chaos that had engulfed the neighborhood. Karen's latest outburst was still fresh, her shrill demands echoing through the subdivision like a relentless siren. Her frustration over the new locks was palpable, a melody of irritation and denial underscored by the realization that she no longer held the reins. Her reaction was predictable, as if orchestrated in a symphony, where every note was discordant yet expected. The locks were merely the spark to her gasoline-fueled outrage. I watched her march back to her house, her steps heavy with the weight of her own indignation. It was almost theatrical in its predictability, a one-woman show of entitlement and disbelief. I had documented every interaction, every sneer and sideways glance. Like a diligent scholar marking the progress of a natural disaster, Karen's behavior was a study in chaos theory, small changes in her environment creating seismic shifts in her demeanor. She had been relentless in her campaign against anything she perceived as a threat to her authority. But hiring a private investigator to confirm my tenancy seemed to transcend even her previous antics. In the quiet moments, I reviewed my notes, my own narrative taking shape against the backdrop of her drama, her speeches at the HOA meetings, the letters she sent to the board, and her endless complaints. Each piece of evidence built a fortress around me, a subtle and impenetrable defense. Her words, once weapons, now seemed to ricochet back, powerless and absurd. I knew something about quiet power. It was in the way the leaves fell silently yet persistently, transforming the landscape without fanfare. I could feel it in the slow shift of the neighborhood, the gradual acceptance that came with my presence as both tenant and landlord. There was a certain irony in her struggle, her refusal to see that the world around her was changing, and she was powerless to stop it. My subtle counter was not a grand gesture, but rather a series of small, deliberate actions. I attended HOA meetings, my presence a silent reminder of my role. I engaged with neighbors, finding common ground over mundane topics like lawn care and holiday decorations. I listened and learned, absorbing the rhythms of the community like the roots of a tree reaching deep into the earth. Karen's attempts to rally support only highlighted the growing divide between her and the rest of the neighborhood. Her allies dwindled, their numbers reduced to a whisper against the growing chorus of acceptance. Her once powerful voice was now a lone trumpet in a symphony of change. As the days turned into weeks, I sensed a shift in the air. The tension that had once been as thick as fog now seemed to dissipate, replaced by a tentative peace. Karen's outbursts became less frequent, her energy waning like a storm that had finally spent itself. There was a beauty in her unraveling, a poignant reminder that even the fiercest storms must eventually yield to calm. In the end, it was a simple conversation that turned the tide, my words carefully chosen, their impact measured and deliberate. Perhaps she expected more resistance, more of the battle she had prepared for, but calm persistence often holds more power than the fiercest gale. In that moment, the neighborhood felt different, as if the weight of clash and conflict had been lifted, leaving room for something new to take root. I sat back on the porch, the world around me a tapestry of quiet resilience and enduring change. The neighborhood was still, the leaves whispering secrets to the wind, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the street in a golden glow, I realized that sometimes the most profound victories are those fought and won in silence. With the HOA meeting adjourned, the echoes of Karen's indignation still reverberated through the sterile hallways of our complex. Her fury was a storm contained only by the thin walls and quick glances exchanged among the residents who had witnessed the unraveling. I stood calmly, the eye of this storm, letting the tempest swirl around me without so much as ruffling a feather. It was not the first time Karen had attempted to wield her self-appointed authority like a scepter, but it may be the last time it would hold any weight. Her outrage at finding me not just her neighbor, but her landlord, had been a delightfully ironic twist of fate. The locks had been changed as a matter of course, a routine security measure, yet it seemed to her a personal affront, an act of defiance against her unwritten rules. After the meeting, I took the elevator to my apartment, savoring the silence. Each number lighting up above the door felt like another step in a chess game, one where I had learned to wait, to watch, and to move, only when the time was right. Karen had played her part with predictable fervor, her disdain, a familiar melody that underscored our shared history in this microcosm of suburban drama. Inside, the scent of fresh paint lingered, a reminder of the changes I was bringing, both cosmetic and fundamental. I watched the sunset through the wide window, the sky blushing with colors that the day had kept hidden. I reflected on the quiet power of actions taken without fanfare, the slow, deliberate steps that lead to irrevocable change. Karen's reaction had been fierce, but it was her fury that spoke volumes more than her words. The new locks were a symbol, not of exclusion, but of ownership, a reminder that the world she had crafted from her certainties was shifting beneath her feet. She could storm and rage, but the foundation had already been laid. In the days that followed, I moved without the need for confrontation or spectacle. I met with contractors, reviewed plans for improvements, and spoke in measured tones with the HOA board, whose members had begun to see the merit in my vision. The paperwork was methodical, a testament to the precision with which I had planned my acquisition. Each signature was a quiet declaration, a reminder that power often lies in silence more than in noise. Karen, of course, did not retreat gracefully into the shadows. Her complaints echoed through the corridors, a symphony of disapproval that only underscored her resistance to change. She gathered signatures, wielded petitions as if they were torches in the dark. I watched with a detached curiosity, aware that the true battleground was not in the public displays but in the nuances of legal understanding. In the bylaws, she had never truly grasped. I knew her type well. Her strength came from a belief that the rules were hers to command, an illusion I had allowed to flourish until it no longer served its purpose. Her struggle was not with me, but with the inevitability of change. In the end, her protests were absorbed by the bureaucracy she had once manipulated, a bureaucracy that now worked in my favor. The climax came, not with a bang, but with a whisper. As she faced the realization that the world she had long navigated with impunity was no longer hers to control, her defeat was not in loss, but in the quiet acquiescence that followed her final attempt at resistance. She learned, as many do, that power is often most potent when it is least visible. And so, the locks remained changed, unyielding symbols of a new order. The community began to shift, adapt, and grow, as communities do when allowed the space to breathe. And Karen, her storm spent, receded into the background, a part of the landscape she'd once dominated. The silence that followed was not empty but full of promise, a testament to what can be built when the noise fades away. The morning sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the pavement. I watched as the neighborhood bustled back to life, each home a reflection of its occupants' stories and struggles. The air carried a sense of renewal, like the first breath after a storm, the promise of a fresh start, lingering in the cool morning breeze. Karen's house, with its exaggerated ornaments and overly manicured lawn, stood like a fortress of misplaced intentions. But no longer did her presence command the street. Instead, it seemed to shrink, its loud facade failing to mask the hollowness within. I strolled down the sidewalk, feeling the shift beneath my feet, the gentle rebellion of change. Neighbors now greeted each other with genuine smiles, walls of indifference crumbling into shared laughter. The transformation was subtle, yet profound, like the first hint of spring after a harsh winter. As I approached the modest house of our new landlord, Mr. Thompson, a warmth spread through me. He had brought a quiet dignity to the role, a steady hand that guided rather than controlled. His calm presence was a balm to the community's previously frayed nerves. The locks that had once caused such a stir now symbolized a secure new beginning. In the garden, he knelt over a flower bed, his hands gently coaxing life from the soil. It was a simple act, but one that spoke volumes of his character, creating, nurturing, transforming. The irony wasn't lost on me that those qualities were the very antitheses of Karen's reign. Karen, sidelined now, had retreated into a self-imposed exile. Her voice no longer the strident clarion call it once was. The community had found its voice, each note harmonizing into a symphony of resilience and unity. Her curt orders and endless complaints had become mere echoes of a forgotten era. I found myself reflecting on the irony of it all, the swift justice of life's turning wheels. Karen's obsession with control had been the very thing that unspooled her carefully woven web. The locks were just locks, but she had chosen to see them as symbols of defiance against her unwarranted authority. A movement at the edge of my vision caught my attention. A child, no more than 6 or 7, was arranging a row of pebbles along the curb, each one a promise, a dream, a possibility. Watching him, I realized that the real change was not in the bricks and mortar of our homes, but in the hearts of those who lived there. The proverbial stage had shifted, and Karen's role had diminished, her once booming presence now a mere whisper lost in the growing chorus of community voices. The neighborhood had found its rhythm, its heart, and its soul. In the quiet moments, I let myself savor the irony. Karen, with her loud demands and desperate need for control, had become an unwitting catalyst for the very change she feared. Her resistance had only strengthened our resolve, her exclusion, our unity. It was a story as old as time, the downfall of the self-appointed ruler, the rise of the people in their own narrative. with a final glance at Karen's house. Now just another structure amidst many. I turned back toward my home, a contentment settling over me. The neighborhood was no longer hers to rule. It belonged to all of us, woven together by shared hopes and newfound understanding. And in the end, perhaps that was the greatest revenge of all living well, building a community on the foundations of respect and kindness, and leaving behind the specter of control that had once loomed so large.